what collapsed for my generation was essentially in the education system. It was collapsing for everybody, really. And this is the thing that hasn't been told, that the comprehensive system wasn't working for working class people. I mean, some people here may have went to good secondary schools, but overall, it just didn't work, you know. And so many of us were kind of left with nothing, really, at the end of that process. And I think that was the factor that drove down the expectations, because you had one generation thinking that, okay, right, their children would do better or do well. And it was collapsing for everybody. And that's the part that hasn't been told. So you see, I was just black kids were collapsing. Yeah. It was all.
There's another great quote which I wrote. You said, the idea that black people who were successful in schools like mine had to work twice as hard as their white peers is a myth. I wasn't sure where that was going to go next. And you said, none of us worked hard at school because nobody expected us to.
Yeah. I mean, and that's that, and also this idea of working twice as straight. I don't remember this. This comes from America. This thing, the talk. You have to tell your child to work twice as hard as a white person. Well, I mean, my mother didn't tell me that. She just said that. All she said to me is that, Tony, you're a genius. That's all. Yeah, and that was it. That was sufficient. By the way, I'm still going to beat you for stealing that sixpence from my purse, but you're a genius.
But something that you mentioned earlier about is the new anti-racism against white people, or the white majority. Part of the problem with it, it often disciplines ethnic minority people. So it's not just the fact that we hear about all of the problems of whiteness. As Tony alluded to, there is a very narrow idea about what it means to be black within society, often taken from schools of thought within America. And if you veer away from that, then your identity as a black person is unfortunately delegitimized. And I think that does have an effect on the extent to which, ironically, ethnic minority people participate in the discussion, you know, supposedly amplifying ethnic minority voices and so on. But I do think that, at least with the Equiano Project, the overwhelming majority of people that get in touch with us are ethnic minority people that are so relieved to hear a different perspective that represents them the most. And actually, in terms of my family, I'm of Nigerian origin, actually in terms of the conversations we're having at the dinner table with our family members, a lot of these values about personal responsibility, agency, hard work, the values of education is our normal. But sadly, the narrative around that in public life is not reflected. And I think what Tony is talking about is actually, I would argue, a very strong thread within, no doubt, in particular, West African communities as well. And I think that he talks about that as well in the book, that the immigrant optimism and a lot of the values within certain West African communities have almost become a kind of model for things that potentially could be replicated within other communities about what success could look like. So I actually think that in private conversations, a lot of this isn't actually as controversial.
Well, reading Lord Sewell's book, there was the section when he's talking about Brixton riots, 1981, and the context of those and the people that were involved and why. And I was maybe 12 or something like that at the time, or 10 or 11 or whatever, but I can remember seeing it on the news and being aware of what was going on. Fast forward a little bit as a teenager, myself and my wife here in Huddersfield would remember those times, the presence of the National Front. You know, if you walk down a subway, broken glass and swastikas on the scroll on the walls, NF, the whole thing. And then there was another side, because there was a very present black cultural presence, Caribbean cultural presence in the town as well, music and venues and a kind of resistance vibe around it, really, I suppose, Rasta and whatnot at that time. And then fast forward to 2020, and we're seeing, as Lord Sewell describes, quite privileged people, often white middle class people, participating in pulling down statues and whatnot. And when they came to pull me down, it felt like it was coming from an alliance of ethnocentric bigots, really, who happened to be black, an alliance with a kind of white middle class intelligentsia, as it were, that have now appointed themselves as being the arbiter of how you think about race at this time. And they would, courses on allyship and things like that they did insist that people would go on. How did that happen? How did these people since 2020 suddenly become the dominant force in thinking about how white people are meant to approach race?
Absolutely right on the context of the issue of particularly of fathers in relationship to the family and how that works. Yes, I've always argued for that in fact that was avoided and kind of bypassed, and we never really got to terms with some of that. So some of the therapeutic work and some of the almost the kind of let me tell you what used to happen. It just was that whole issue of when the mum and dad were going to break up and the child was in the middle of that had a massive impact on the outcomes of the student. And somehow we just sort of said, oh, we're going to pile in on white teachers as the only reason why these outcomes were happening. And nobody, I remember you couldn't get a research grant to look at any of this area. But if you were going to write a paper about racist teachers, you were getting the money. It just was bizarre. So we just went down that route. And and even now, you can't write about that. So somehow we've avoided that. I think the point about patriotism is interesting because it seems to me that when you travel the world, other countries seem to be allowed to be patriotic, and it's only in Britain that we just ashamed. The only time we get patriotic is when we are about to lose at football, and everybody has the flag, but then after that we go back to beating up Britain again, and I don't understand that because it, in a way, I do understand it in a way in the sense of where it's come from, but I do think that is a noble aim. To sort of, and it doesn't have to be about going back into a nationalism that's racist based, but it's one that really does look at some of the core things that we really do like about this country and embracing them and really saying it's for all. Like Shakespeare, for example, yeah? One of our icons, right, happened to be an old white man. But so what? He's still the best player in the town, isn't he? In terms of playwriting. So in a way, we kind of have to kind of look at what we have produced and how we are good at these things and get everybody around it. And I do think that is right for us in schools and in what we do. And I do think that I think that's where we're going to find some of these answers in trying to rework a kind of, dare I say, a nationalism, but the one that really is genuinely inclusive, and proud, but it's based on quality, and it's based on quality of opportunities, necessarily outcomes.